Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Sabrina will introduce all of us because she's better at that. But I just want to thank everyone for coming. We've got like the Google Design Sprint chapters and more. I think people who even are in the chapter signed up for this, somehow signed up for this because like I think over 1,000 people signed up for this. And we'll be talking to Marty today, a legend, really. Everyone's so excited about it. Everything product we'll be talking about, whatever we can get into this hour. And I'm Marit. I'm leading the Tel Aviv chapter, and this is my partner Ram, and we have a design studio together. And Sabrina, just introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm here in Stuttgart. I'm the Google Design Sprint chapter lead from Stuttgart. And now, let's say we are very international now, and I'm the founder of the Design Sprint studio here. So yeah, don't lose any minute.
Okay, so
let's start with the first question.
Marty is most known for his book Inspired, even though he's written 2 books, Inspired and Empowered, which are both about product. One is about product managers, and we'll clarify that for everyone, I guess. And one is about product leaders. There's some overlapping, so we'll be talking about that as well. And Marty, you have like over 2 decades of experience in Silicon Valley, top companies, eBay, HP, Netscape, just from my memory. All these big companies, wonderful, amazing products. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks. No, thank you. I appreciate it.
And I think that the first thing, because maybe not everyone has read your books, can you please give us a little short about what Inspired is? By the way, I've read both books twice. And I really, and even more, so, but what for you is Inspired and what for you is Empowered, and where is the overlapping in those two? So
Sure. Well, so I wrote Inspired, and I'm admitting how old I am really, but in fact, in 1 month from now, I will hit 40 years doing tech products exclusively. So, super long time, obviously. But the nice part is I've got to watch the industry really grow up and develop. And, I love doing tech products. So it's one of those things you never really get tired of. And every team is different and every product is different. So it's been a terrific ride. But I wrote Inspired because I wanted to share the techniques I was seeing being used by the best product teams. And I was very lucky. It was mostly luck. I was at Netscape, which was, for those that don't know, that was the original internet company. And I had a great job there. I was VP of product, platform and tools and so forth. My whole career has mostly been working on products for developers, engineers, designers, product teams. So I love working with product teams. That was my responsibility there, was to give teams the tools they need to build internet scale applications. And so it was a perfect place. And anyway, because of my time there, it got me the job building as the original head of product at eBay, but more generally, it got me into early Google, early Amazon, and then, of course, a few years later, companies like Facebook, Netflix, Twitter. So because I was, working with so many of these early companies, I saw them using techniques. And I was realizing that the techniques they were using were so much different and better than the techniques that most companies were using. And so I said, well, I should write about this. I think it's so fun to do product the way great teams do them. And so I wrote Inspired, and I actually wrote 2 editions of Inspired. One was like 13 years ago, and then the new edition came out 3 years ago. And the new edition was completely, there's not a single page from the original because the techniques had got so much better. But one of the things that happened with the second edition was, in truth, the first edition was really just in the bubble, which is Silicon Valley. These are people I knew and companies I knew. And they liked it. That was great. But it was really already preaching to the choir. But with the new edition, it's spread all over the world, really. Really took me by surprise, but I met a lot of teams all over the world. You know, my first visit, I've been going to Germany for a while, first visits to Israel, just first visits to China, to Brazil, all over. And one of the things I learned was that the teams really wanted to do products the way I was talking about. The problem was their managers. The problem was their bosses, their leaders were not letting them work that way, which of course, to somebody out of Silicon Valley, that just sounded crazy. I mean, why wouldn't they want to work the way the most valuable companies in the world are working? I never even questioned that. But then I realized, well, there's got to be some reasons, because they're not letting them. I was meeting a lot of leaders, and I was saying, like, you know, you're not working like Amazon. You know, you're not working like Google, or in Europe, you know, you're not working like Spotify. Why don't you do that? And, you know, there were a lot of reasons. Fundamentally, they didn't trust the teams the way these other companies do. And so I realized that it wasn't enough to share the practices of the best teams. I also needed to share the best practices of the best leaders. And just to me, when I define product leadership, that's managers and leaders of product management, product design, and engineering. Those are the three areas I really care about. Those are the core of the team. And so I wrote Empowered over the last several years aimed at them. And the idea is that if, you know, leaders learn what they need to do, which is a lot, by the way, I will tell you, most leaders have had two responses. The first is they often tell me they're not doing any of the things that I talk about them needing to do. They're not doing any of that. They haven't been doing any of that. And so that's the first problem. And the second problem they say is, and this is hard. You're describing a hard job. I didn't know that. I didn't really sign up for that. And so, yeah, there's a lot. I'm spending most of my time with leaders now, helping them, because most of them know they need to change. Frankly, there are so many disruptors out there in every space, whether it's financial services getting disrupted by Stripe, or fitness getting disrupted by Peloton, or, you know, you name it, e-commerce getting disrupted by Shopify. It's just, there are so much disruption out there. So most of the companies I meet, they know they need to change, but that doesn't necessarily make it any easier. Right. So, yeah, I'm glad I wrote the book. It really introduced me to many, many more CEOs than I would have met before in so many different areas. And that's really the difference: empowered for leaders and inspired for product teams.
And this new one that you're going to do, Loved, is that just your partner at Silicon Valley?
Yeah, that's not me. That's right.
Okay.
That's my partner, Martina, she's tackling another big topic, which is product marketing.
I can't wait.
So many of you know. So, that's a big one too.
Okay, yeah. Okay, Sabrina, do you want to continue?
Yeah, so when you talk about the empowered team, what are, let's say, main ingredients for them? So what role composes them, and what does a regular day look like for these teams? So we're talking about Germany and Israel as different kinds of, let's say, product team behavior. Maybe if you think about, let's say, the German product teams, what would you suggest doing different?
Well, I mean, let's talk in general, especially because I see you have people from every corner of the world here on this call. So the defining characteristic of an empowered team, and I would argue the defining characteristic of all the good companies I know, is that the teams are given problems to solve rather than features to build. Right there, problems to solve rather than, there are so many great quotes. One of my favorite was Steve Jobs' quote, used to say, "We don't hire all these smart engineers to tell them what to build. We hire all these smart engineers so they can show us what's possible." So the basic idea is you're given a problem to solve, like maybe not enough people are purchasing products internationally. Maybe sales are only within the home country, but not enough international. That's a problem to solve. Or maybe it takes too long for a customer to onboard. That's a problem to solve. Or maybe you haven't achieved product market fit. That's another problem to solve. But the point is, those are problems to solve, as opposed to a feature team, or worse, where they're given a roadmap of features, usually coming from some stakeholders or executives. And those features, this is what's important, those are solutions, or what they are is hopefully solutions. Most of them, as we know, are not going to solve the problem. But instead of being given a problem to solve, like it takes too long to onboard a new customer, some executive is saying, what we really need to do is add online videos to help people onboard faster. So a feature team just builds online videos and says, well, we did what we were told. If that doesn't improve onboarding, whose fault is that? So in an empowered team, they are given problems to solve. Now, in order to give a team problems to solve, it means you need to make sure you have a cross-functional product team so that they can solve them. And normally what that means is product management, product design, and engineering. The engineers are responsible for the enabling technology. The designers are responsible for creating an experience that works for the customer. And the product manager is responsible for making sure the solution is valuable and viable, which means customers will buy it and it will work for our company. Now, on a feature team, this is going to sound harsh, but on a feature team, you still need engineers and designers, but you really don't need a product manager. And that's because value and viability is coming implicitly from the stakeholders. They're just basically taking responsibility for that. They say, this is what I want you to build, so you build it. And that's a very different model. I would also say, in truth, the product manager on a feature team is really a project manager. They're really herding the cats and getting that through. Another big difference between a feature team and a product team is a feature team, the most you can hold them responsible for is output. They ship the feature on time, on budget. That's the most you could ask them to do. On an empowered product team, you can actually hold them responsible for a result. Because if you say, look, the problem is it takes 3 weeks to onboard a new customer, we need that to be 3 hours. Then the product team, since they're able to figure out the solution to that, they can actually sign up for results, not just output. So there is a big difference. This difference between how a good company works and how most companies work is not a small difference. In fact, I would say it's a huge difference, and it's nowhere is it bigger than the role of product manager.
And can I have like a follow-up question on that? 'Cause I think a lot of people are struggling with building the required trust to actually do that. So you're like, okay, I want to empower, but how do I know? How do I know that this is actually working? In what kind of resolution do I get that feedback? So trust.
No, trust is really at the core here, because it really requires a give and take here. And I have this conversation with CEOs as much as I have it with product managers. So for the CEO, this company is ultimately their responsibility. And so it takes a big leap of faith for them to entrust a product team to solve a problem, rather than the CEO saying, I think I know what we need to build, or I've hired these 3 MBAs, let them tell them what to do. And that's a big difference, right? That's a big leap of faith. Now, it really requires the CEO to give that team a chance, but it also requires the product team, especially the product manager, has to step up. So for example, if you have a Scrum product owner, CSPO trained product owner, no CEO that's worth their weight is going to trust the CSPO. They're not trustworthy. It's an administrative job. That is not the kind of person you trust. They need somebody who knows the customer, that knows the data, that knows how your business works, that knows the financial constraints, that knows how you monetize, knows your go-to-market path, knows the limitations of your sales channel, knows the compliance regulations and responsibilities. So they need somebody with this skill level, not an administrator, not a product owner. So lately I've been, and I admit I've been hard on a lot of European, mostly the agile coaches, because they have been telling people that let us train you as a product owner and you'll be a product manager. And that has led to more failed products than anything else I can name, because they're wrong. They have no idea. First of all, those people doing the training, almost none of them have ever been a product manager, and certainly never at a good product company. So all they're trying to do is make a few bucks by just charging these people for a certification, and they're trusting that they don't know any better. So to me, I'm very angry with this, and I think it's long overdue. This went way too long. Now, in truth, this is not a problem in the US. It's not a problem in Israel. It's not a problem in a lot of the world, but it is a big problem in Europe. And I think what's really going on, and I hate to, I'm stereotyping, this is not a good thing to do, but in Europe, there's a real attraction to process. And I think that's very dangerous. Jeff Bezos, as you know, the founder, and until yesterday, the CEO of Amazon, Bezos always says, you know, be very careful about process. Process can kill your company. It becomes the thing. And unfortunately, there are many people, well, there are many people in the world, but especially in Europe, that are very attracted to process. And I have to sit down with them and say, it's not about process. Process is there to serve you, not for you to serve it. So for there's various reasons, but let me just say, to answer your question, Rob, is it requires a real product manager. And let me put it this way. If the CEO does not believe that the product manager is literally an expert on your customers, they're never going to trust them. And they really shouldn't trust them.
So you believe like it's a bottom up and top, like it's a
know
CEO empowering, and then you got to step up as a product manager, prove that this actually can work.
Yes, I've learned that it requires both. It really does require both. It requires the product teams, especially the product managers, to step up. It's usually not very hard to get the designers and engineers to step up. This is what they were trained to do anyway. But it can be very hard for the product managers to fundamentally change from a project management role to a true product management role. So it requires that. And it also requires the CEO to give them a chance.
Mm-hmm.
How do all these, like, how do you avoid creating a mess? Because, you know, you've got, sometimes like you want to solve just one or two big problems, and then you pass it on to your squads or whatever, you know, your houses or your teams. And like, you don't have like a million, you're not trying to solve like a million problems, hopefully, right? Like you said yourself, I think in your book, you're trying to solve one or two problems each quarter, or, you know, over a couple of quarters. It sounds like a mess, you know, like it sounds like it's a recipe for a mess, because like, it sounds like, how do you keep like the you know, like everyone's creating a different solution in order to solve this problem. And then which one ships, you know, or like which one, how do you do all that?
All right. Well,
how do you connect between them even?
Yes, I wouldn't call it a mess. I would say it's hard, but you are describing a company without product leaders. You're describing chaos. So if all you had were empowered product teams and you didn't have product leaders that knew what their job was, you would have chaos. And I think that's the mess you're alluding to. But normally you just describe the job of the leaders. Number one, the product vision, how it all ties together into the North Star. Number two, the product strategy. How the product strategy is where we decide what are the most important problems that our teams need to solve, because we need to get that vision accomplished, but we also need to meet the needs of the business. We also need a team topology, which is how are we going to break up this work into product teams, where those teams are loosely coupled but highly aligned. So this is what leaders do. If you don't have those leaders, it is exactly the mess you're describing.
So can you give like a tangible case study or example of where the strategy starts on top? Again, like those problems, I feel like also are bottom up sometimes, because like when you're like talking to the customers every day, you do have like as someone who's empowered, you do have an insight to what the biggest problems should be. And that you're saying is decided at the top still, like the strategy. So
yeah, you're bringing up a good topic. It's
Okay.
it's a little bit of a nuanced topic, but it's worth really calling out because a lot of people get
Okay.
confused on this. So let me be very clear because I don't want to confuse anybody. It is the responsibility of the leaders. Normally, this is the chief product officer, vice president product, whatever you want to call it, to define that product strategy, which, yes, does mean making some hard decisions about what are the most important problems to solve. Now, any good product leader will tell you they love it when a team brings them an insight or brings them an idea. They say, hey, we were talking to customers yesterday, and you need to hear what we learned. That is gold. And in fact, those insights often power the next iteration of the product strategy. That said, this is really important because a lot of people confuse what empowerment really means. It doesn't mean that a team can go work on any problem they want. That would be another form of chaos. It doesn't mean that. It means that the leaders give that team a problem and they get to figure out the best way to solve that problem. Now, that means that when they're, normally, okay, you give a team a problem and they have two things they need to do. They need to figure out a solution worth building, and they need to build it and deliver it, right? So that's discovery and delivery. But when they're doing discovery, they are not really trying to look for problems to solve. They've been given a problem to solve. So it starts with, here's the problem you need to solve. And those of you with some user research background probably know there's two forms of user research. There's two forms of this kind of learning. One is you're evaluating evaluative research, where you're seeing if the prototype you have in mind actually solves that problem. That's 90+% of product discovery. We have a problem to solve. We have ideas to solve it. We're prototyping those ideas. We're testing those ideas with customers, with stakeholders. We can talk about that. The 10% is, sometimes when you're doing that, you come across an even bigger problem, or maybe you're not sure it's bigger, but you see it's a different problem. And so like, wow, maybe we should work on that. Well, the product strategy depends on us solving the problem we've been asked to solve. But that doesn't mean we can't share with our leaders, with the rest of our other teams. We found a big opportunity. That's called a generative insight. Our product discovery work has generated a new insight, a new opportunity. So the point is this, because a lot of people talk about discovery, because discovery applies to both understanding the problem space and the solution space. But I try to be very honest with teams. In a good company, almost all of it is on the solution. The problem has been given to you from the product strategy. And that if your leader is competent, they have a lot of evidence that that is a real problem. Now, nobody can know, is that the most important problem in the world for you to solve? Who knows? That's an impossible question to really answer. But what you can say, is it a worthy problem to solve? And if your product leader is competent, then it's going to be a worthy problem to solve. So now, it's all about the solution. It's all about, can you as a product team come up with a solution that's good enough to get people to switch? And really, if you boil down what makes product hard, it's this. Ben Horowitz, some of you may know that name. He's one of the best product thinkers I've ever met and worked with. He's brilliant. I learned a lot from him. But Ben likes to say, what's hard about product is it's not enough for you to be comparable to the other solutions. To get people to actually switch to your product and buy your product, the customer has to believe it's on the order of 10 times better. So when you look at how is it that all these people switch to Slack, how is it that all these people switch to Shopify, how is it that so many companies are switching to Stripe? Because they consider it that much better. And that's what product is about. And that's where product discovery comes in. And it's worth pointing out, that's all solution discovery. The problems have been problems for years. The issue is not, is it a problem? The issue is, can you come up with a good enough solution? And that's really where most of your time needs to be if you're an engineer, designer, or product manager on that.
Okay, and speaking of discovery, because a lot of these people do come from the design sprint methodology and stuff. So what do you think about that? As I know you were talking about in your book about different, types of testing prototypes and for different reasons of the discovery period. Can you talk a little bit about what you think about the Google Design Sprint as a discovery tool for these empowered teams, or just your thoughts on it? So
yeah, well, let me first sort of give the high level answer, and then there's a very useful topic that we can dive into if you want. So design sprints, also known as discovery sprints, these are among my favorite techniques. Now, I want to be honest, they're awesome techniques, but it is very unusual for a given product team to do more than 1 week of discovery sprint in a quarter or even in 2 quarters. They are exhausting, they're brutal, and in truth, they're overkill for most discovery work we need to do. Spending a dedicated week on most problems don't need it. What I love it for is for those big problems that if you don't do something like that could easily end up taking 2 months instead of 5 days. So I love it as a technique, full stop. Just, it's a great technique. Now, it's one of 100 techniques. So good product teams should know how to do a design sprint, but they should know how to do many, many other techniques. And really a design sprint is kind of a meta technique because it brings together several things that are very good to do. It sort of starts with an opportunity assessment, which is a good, simple thing to do. Make sure we're all aligned on the problem. It gets quickly into prototyping. It tests those prototypes with stakeholders. It tests those prototypes with users. It makes a decision based at the end. Those are good things to do. So love them. Now, I'm actually working on another article right now, and the topic is the difference between discovery and design. And this is why I personally, the truth is a design sprint can be used in either a feature team or a real product team. Now, but there's a real difference in how it's done. And that's why I thought this is maybe a good excuse to bring that up. If you've been given a problem to solve, then it's really a discovery sprint because you have to figure out a solution to that problem. And that requires product skills, it requires engineering skills, it requires design skills. However, if you've already been given the solution, which is unfortunately the case in so many companies, they've already been given the solution. They're like, what we want you to do is implement this new flow. Now, in that situation, you need to do some design and you need to do some engineering. It's really, they need to design that implementation, that solution, and they need to design the software for that implementation. Now that's non-trivial, don't get me wrong. User experience design and software design are important things, but realistically, that's like 10 to 20% of what a real discovery sprint is. It's a very, it's good practice for sure, but it is much easier for a designer if you just give them, this is what you need to design versus here's the problem. You need to come up with the solution. That is way harder. So it really depends on what kind you're talking about. And it also depends obviously on, the culture of the company. But when I talk about discovery sprints, design sprints, I'm talking about coming up with a solution to a hard problem. So it really is discovery.
What we found out a lot of time that even if you do if you're like a feature company, running a design sprint can segue you into a more discovery mode, because then you're forced to ask questions that you need to, what are what are we solving here, actually? So that's like, I was wondering about the culture behind like the discovery. Who owns the discovery? In your book, you talked about like bringing the engineers into the user interviews and all that. Can you talk a little bit more about like how do you make discovery inclusive?
Yes, that's a great question, a great topic. And also it gives me an excuse. I've been starting a couple of years ago, I got a question that I just thought was a really powerful question. It came from a CEO, because obviously, if you've read any of my books, you know I have a lot of opinions on a lot of different topics. And the CEO was saying, look, too much. What's the one thing that's most important? That if I just change one thing I'm doing, it will make a noticeable impact. And first of all, I thought that was an awesome question. It's a hard question, but it's an awesome question. And I thought of it and I said, look, the single most important thing is the idea of an empowered engineer. I said, that is the one thing I can point to that every great product company I know has. Even though some companies don't really empower, they don't have good product managers, they often don't have enough design, they often have executives that are not well behaved, they have all these issues. But if they have empowered engineers, they make it happen. I personally believe the single biggest reason Israel has such a disproportionate level of success with startups is because Israel gets the idea of an empowered engineer right at the core. And because if you haven't, and first of all, here's the fundamental reason, because the executives, the customers, nobody else, including product managers and designers usually, they don't know what's possible. The engineers are working with the enabling technology every single day, so it puts them in the best position to see what's just now possible. Yet pick any bad product company, any company that's not consistently innovating, and I bet you those engineers are not even invited to the discussion. They are not even in the room when these roadmaps are coming up. They're not included at all. The engineers are just used to code. That's it. They're just like, shut up and code. And in fact, in most of those terrible companies, they're not even employees. They're outsourced. They hire Accenture or something, and they have a bunch of engineers somewhere else in the world, in China and India or wherever. And that's like, there is no way you're going to innovate in that model. So right at the heart, the most important thing is this idea of an empowered engineer. Now, once you have an empowered engineer, you really want to give them the benefits of a strong designer and a strong product manager, because they can help with the constraints that those engineers need. But, and I should say, I mean, that quote comes from, it's one of the common themes between Google, between Amazon, between Apple. They all started with this idea of an empowered engineer. And by the way, it all came from the same person. A guy named Bill Campbell was literally the coach for a decade to Bezos, to Steve Jobs, and to Larry and Sergey at Google. And he was the one who first taught me that the most important thing was an empowered engineer. His name was Bill Campbell. So yes, the book $1 Trillion Coach shares from a lot of the Google execs that he coached, shares a lot of the lessons. And my book Empowered is actually dedicated to him. I wasn't lucky enough to be coached by him personally, although I wish I was, but he did coach 3 of the people I worked for. So I grew up hearing his lessons. So this is so important. And I would put that to you. If any of your companies, if you want to get serious about becoming a great company, it starts by empowering your engineers, which means you need to let them figure out the best solution to the problem, not just implement whatever bright idea you or somebody else has of the day.
Do you think that like those problems though, I still feel like they need to be in the context of some kind of.
That's called the product strategy. That's what the product strategy is.
that's what I want you really to give us an idea of what that product strategy would look like, because it's not just like we want more users, or you know what I mean. Can you give us an example more so that we understand what kind of that brief would look like?
Sure. And
So,
actually, I've got a fun example that I could share that just recently became public, but it was one of the most amazing product strategies in history from the most secretive company in our industry, which most of you probably know is Apple. So anyway, and I do, like, in the book Empowered, there's a whole case study with a product strategy. There's 100 pages on product strategy. You can read all about it. And on the svpg.com website, there's examples of product strategy. But the one I was referring to is, you guys probably at least saw the lawsuit between Epic, the makers of Fortnite, and Apple. And I didn't think Epic had a chance, unfortunately, based on the laws in the US at least. But it was fascinating because they have something in the legal world called discovery, where a lot of the emails became public, including the original email from the VP at Apple that proposed the strategy, which became the App Store. And of course, I don't know how many of you remember, the first iPhone did not have an app store. And by the way, Steve Jobs resisted the idea. He had to be persuaded to open up the iPhone to allow third-party apps. But anyway, that's a whole other story. Anyway, Bertrand Servlet was the executive at Apple, and he knew this was going to happen one way or another, because people were already basically hacking the phones so that they could install their own apps. So he knew Apple wanted to be on top of this. So he proposed a product strategy and a vision to Steve Jobs in an email. And Steve Jobs gave, like, an hour later, a one-line answer: do it, just get it ready for the next developer conference. So anyway, you can read this email. It is one of the most concise and excellent descriptions of a product strategy I've ever seen. He said, look, we need to do this, but we need to do it right. And that means doing 4 things. And he basically spelled out, we have 4 problems we have to solve. It's going to be hard. Nobody's actually solved those problems before. And actually, the iPhone and their ecosystem is still the only ones that do. If you know, on Android, it's a completely different model, and with a very different vision. So you can read that. There are literally 4 problems to solve. One of them was make it safe for the user. Anything they download from Apple, they need to not have to worry is going to, like, steal all their information. Another one was, we need to provide developers with a real solution, because it's hard to develop an iPhone app. We need to, it's going to be a Mac-based cross-development solution. That was a problem that needed to be solved. They also had a very hard problem, was we need to decide public APIs. Right now, it's just Apple only, so we don't worry about that. But we're going to have to define a set of public APIs that abstract the details of the hardware, which, by the way, is a very hard problem. And they did remarkably well. Anyway, this isn't a product strategy. His argument is, if our vision is this is what we're going to do, we need a product strategy that makes that happen. You can read the original product strategy. So the first thing that Apple did well is they had leaders that understood product strategy, and they still have many of my favorite product leaders in the world are executives at Apple. And then the second thing they did well is they had teams that were capable of solving these problems, right? Very strong engineers, very strong designers. That's always been the core DNA of Apple. And they gave them these problems, and they figured them out.
And they didn't have a roadmap. I mean, how does that work? Like, what about really, like, shipping and time to market and all that stuff? I mean, not everyone's Apple too, so it's like they feel like they need to get out there. And how do you deal with that? Like,
well, there's a number of problems there, or that you're mixing in. So the first one is, you're right, Apple has a very complicated ecosystem. So they need to coordinate to execute. In fact, they're probably the best company at the world at cross-platform. I think they've got 8 platforms now, coordination. Now, so that doesn't go away. Execution doesn't go away. They have a very strong competency at Apple on program management, on execution. And so does Google, and so does Amazon. A lot of these complex systems need this, and they have to have this. So the roadmaps themselves are actually not a problem, as long as you create those after you've done discovery to figure out a solution worth building. Companies get in trouble because they do it instead of product discovery. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem. But as long as you've done the discovery, that's actually called a high integrity commitment. We know what we're promising. It's absolutely not an issue. And you have to do it on a company that's even a fraction of the size of Apple.
So how do you commit on the output of a discovery phase? So you say, when will you solve this?
No, that's a good question. Let's talk about it because it helps us double click in on what discovery really is. Discovery is about answering 4 questions, addressing 4 risks. Our job, of course, is to come up with a solution, but there are 4 risks with that solution. The most important one is, will customers buy it or choose to use it? That's value risk. The second risk is, assuming they want to use this, can they figure it out? That's usability risk. The third risk is what Ron was getting at. Can we build it? Do we know how to code it? Literally, do we have the algorithms? Do we have the technology stack in place? And how about this? Do we have people on the team with the skills to know how to use that technology to do it? That's all feasibility. And the fourth is viability. Just because our customers love it doesn't mean it's legal, doesn't mean that we can cost effectively market it, sell it, support it. It doesn't mean it's compliant. So these are viability risks. Those are what we're trying to answer in discovery. As soon as we have reasonable confidence on those 4 things, we build the damn thing. But until then, we prototype and test against these 4 risks. And what we're saying, and this is what a high integrity commitment is, it's not actually that complicated. What we're trying to do is once we feel like we have reasonable confidence on those 4 risks, we can answer that question, which is, what will we ship? When will we ship it? We can answer that with high confidence. And that's a high integrity commitment. Now, sometimes that only takes a day or 2 to answer for most things. For a big thing, it might take a week or 2. For a machine learning project, it might take a quarter or 2. But those are more exceptions. For most things, it's more like a few days. And then we have the data we need to make a high integrity commitment.
So we heard about some interesting examples. Marty, do you have a product team? Do you know about a product team that is doing outstanding work at the moment? Let's say doing products that you admire? And
there's many of them.
Could you point out some? Maybe 1 or 2.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on where in the world we want to talk about. I'd say one of the most impressive companies in the world right now is Stripe. I don't know how many of you know Stripe. It's funny because historically in our industry, the worst companies in the world are banks. Well, really banks and telcos. Banks and telcos have been awful at product forever, but they're kind of oligopolies. So you've heard the too big to fail and all that stuff. And they get away with treating their customers terribly, very low service. We know this. And a remarkable thing has happened over the last 6 months. 3 different CEOs from 3 of the biggest banks in the world somehow found out my name and reached out to me, which of course they would normally never know who I was or care who I was. But they reached out and said, okay, we believe we have to take products seriously now. And I said, why? In all cases, they said, in all cases, Stripe. Stripe is putting the fear of God into these banks and many financial services companies, because Stripe is truly disrupting the space. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great thing, by the way. First of all, I love Stripe. I think they're doing so many things well, but I also think for those of us in the world, almost all of us we're customers of banks, and we will benefit from this. What is it about Stripe? I mean, Stripe, they're a great example of first of all, they're a great example of empowered teams. One of the things I think is impressive is they have two very strong product-oriented founders, two brothers, actually, Irish brothers. And they 10 years ago planned their 10-year vision, and they have just been executing on that vision. And I love that they were very intentional about their culture. When you look at Stripe, there's things they do. You can see the signs, they're like Apple, they believe in long-term vision. Like Apple, they believe in the power of design. Even though Stripe is a platform company, you can still see how design shines through and the belief in that. And then you can see how they've really taken a lot from Google in terms of especially their discovery skills. They know that's the core competency, and also their scale skills, their ability to scale. And then from Amazon, they've very intentionally taken the best of Amazon too. Amazon, they do two things that many people think are in conflict, but they're not. One is they are very fast. They move fast. I mean, honestly, way faster than Google moves and way faster than Apple moves. Amazon moves fast. But interestingly, they also are very thoughtful. In fact, they've designed in deep thinking into their process. One of my favorite techniques is the written narrative, the 6-pager, which is something they've really embraced. And anyway, so they do both. And one of the things they understand is to move fast, you need to think deeply. So, I mean, those are three great companies, full stop, three great companies. Stripe took the best of all three, and they said, this is going to be us. And it's just been remarkable to watch them execute worldwide. But the nice thing is that's one of many. That's one of many. In Sweden, I've been so impressed by Spotify. You know, Spotify is competing against both Amazon, that you just heard me rave about, and Apple, that you've heard me rave about. Two of the best companies in the world, and they've been holding their own. If you ask me the biggest single reason why, empowered engineers. That has always been at the core of, it's part of Swedish culture, but it's always been at the core of Spotify. Shopify is a Canadian company. It's doing amazingly well. Slack was just purchased by Salesforce, so we'll have to see if they change it or not. But so far, they've been doing amazing. And, you know, we've just got there are many examples all around the world today, and that's what I love. It is true that the majority of companies in the world are not like Stripe, but that's why we're on this call. Hopefully we'll get a few more to join the ranks.
I wonder, like, you're talking about like big scale ups, and you worked in those big enterprises, became to be enterprises, and now you have your like a small team, you know, of consultants. You're not scaling up. How does that personally feel? Like it's been a while since you. How does that feel like in the partnership and the small thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, and we don't like to think of ourselves as consultants because, but technically we are, because we're all of us have been operators for most of our career. And so that's what we like to do. And so and the way I work is I'm paid with equity. So if the company doesn't do well, I don't do well. I'm an advisor to a lot of companies. I actually love that because I feel like I genuinely am a member of their teams, a member of the companies. And I love it because I've reached the point in my career where I get bored with any one company. So I like to have many companies that I, get to work with. So, yeah, but I'm the sort of classic management consultancy. I have no interest in that. Yeah.
And do you prefer working with like little startups or with like scale ups or with corporates? Like, where do you find yourself like really making an impact?
No.
And do startups need it even, because they're working so,
No, startups look, the failure rate of startups is terrible. That is no secret. And startups are all about product discovery. If they don't get the product market fit, they're out of money and then they're done. So I love working with startups. I have also, over the last 10 years or so, spend about half my time now with those that are scaling, scale ups or growth stage companies. There's some very hard problems there. I think I've been focusing more on that because that's where the leadership really starts to make a difference in a big way. I don't spend much time with the big corporate enterprise companies, but my partners do. Because I selected my partners because each of them have led those kinds of big companies through the transformation from not very good to awesome. And so that's a whole skill set that I don't have. I've worked in empowered companies from the beginning, but many people haven't. And so to transform one of those companies from the old style to the new style is hard. And that's what they focus on.
Okay. And I'd just like to get, if anyone has a few questions, we just have a few more minutes with you. So does anyone have any questions that they want to post in the chat?
Yeah, and I want to take the chance to tell you, Marty, because I asked what kind of roles people have in the audience, and I just we have a lot of answers. So it's from product manager. We have a lot of product managers, product specialist, senior direct data product, product consultant, executive product consultant, senior product managers, product ops, product manager, director, a lot of product managers. So just to let you know, and we have also some UX designers, some designers, but a lot of product managers.
Not enough engineers.
Yeah, I was asking for the engineers if we have empowered engineers, but not many answers.
One of the reasons I was curious about that was just that we have a real problem in parts of the world about people that are thinking their job is a product owner job. And so that's what I was really looking for. If somebody is product owner, that is not really irrelevant. That's a role that the product manager plays, but it's a small percentage of the role. So.
Okay, we've got the questions coming. Wait, it's too fast. I think someone wrote before, like earlier, they said, like, how many different solutions in the discovery phase should we explore? And is that really what that looks like? Because, like, you've got the strategy, you've got the questions that need to be solved, or the problems that need to be solved, and then you spread them on the teams, okay? And then they're all working on the same problems. And so does that mean that a lot of it goes to the garbage? I mean, do you have a bunch of solutions that you're testing? And then how does that work?
All right. Well, first thing I should correct, you were saying they're all working on the same problems. That would
More or
be
less,
rare.
Okay.
Normally not.
Okay.
Normally, okay, let's say you do a product strategy and there are 20 problems that we need to solve. And you've got 20 teams, so maybe you assign one to problem. Or there are cases where you do intentionally assign the same problem to multiple teams. That might be because you either want them to work together in a collaborative sense, or because you want them to use their own technologies and their own skills to come up with different solutions to the same problem. Not in a competitive sense, but in a sense because you're hoping in an ideal world, they both have a good impact. But more realistically, maybe one of the two actually pans out. So that's what's going on. So there's some number of problems we need solved, and the teams are working on those problems. Now, when they're working on those problems, they have lots of ideas. And frankly, some of the ideas are just variations of the same idea, right? It's like just variations on a theme. And other times it's a whole different approach. There's a technique that I really like, and I have been encouraging people to adopt this into discovery sprints, by the way. The technique comes from somebody named Teresa Torres, who you may know.
I was on a panel with her.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Teresa created a technique because one of the problems that we've all seen and she did something about was a lot of times, so you give a team a problem to solve, the team just wants to jump into prototyping tomorrow. They want to say, okay, I got an idea, let's prototype it, let's see if it works. And her argument is take a breath, doesn't take long, but before you jump into prototyping, let's consider the different ways you might attack this problem. And that's called an opportunity solution tree. When you consider the different ways you might go, it actually only takes a few hours to do this. And then you can get going on your prototyping. But the idea is if one approach doesn't work, you've got other ones ready to go. So it's a nice technique. It fits very well into a design sprint, or at least if it's for an empowered team, a discovery sprint. And yes, Teresa just published a book. It just came out called Continuous Discovery Habits. I thought it was very good, and I have been encouraging people to read it.
When we talk about habits, I just read here a question about culture. So what about habits and culture in product teams? What is your take on that? How important is it for teams?
Well, I mean, there's habits, well, the skills, and then there's the culture. I think those are the two things you're really talking about. The skills, in my experience, are not hard to learn. You can learn the skills. They're straightforward. I've never really met anybody that couldn't learn the skills if they have an open mind and willing to do a little homework. It's not hard. The harder part is usually the mindset, the culture. So, for example, one of the things we really fight and have to unlearn, we have to coach people to unlearn, is thinking, the way it was first explained to me is you have to know what you can't know. There are so many people that believe, unfortunately, what I'm about to say is mostly true with men, but they believe that they must be right. And of course, they're just sure they're right. And one of the prerequisites to becoming a good product person is to know that you're probably wrong. Because if you have that mindset that you're probably wrong, you're like, well, then what's the fastest way I can figure out if this is one of the good ideas or one of the bad ideas? If you don't have that mindset, it leads to all kinds of bad behaviors. It leads to delaying the time before you actually put your idea in front of real customers. It leads to ignoring the data that comes once you do put your idea in front of customers. So it's very important to have this mindset that, look, most ideas don't work. And that's just the reality. Literally on the order of 80 to 90% of product ideas don't work. The most common reason they don't work is because our customers are not as excited about them as we were. Sometimes they don't work because it's so complicated. They don't want to watch a YouTube video just to figure out how to work your product. And a lot of times they don't work because it would be so complicated to build. Nobody has the time for that. So most ideas don't work. And so what we want to do is figure that out in a few hours, not in months.
But really, to figure it out, it has to be shipped and used by the users. No, I mean,
no,
like,
it doesn't. It doesn't. That's
So-
one of the most important things. That's why there's a difference between discovery and delivery. And this is important because if you think you have to ship something in order to test something, you are dooming your team to being incredibly slow. And by the way, if you believe that, you would never do a discovery sprint or a design sprint. Design sprint is predicated on not doing that.
No,
Yes.
that's true. And I've been doing design sprints for years, and that's why, but still there's something about that, like the real validation.
Well,
'Cause you
sure.
can, so
But
like,
what's
I
really
wish I
going
could
on?
say like that the 5 days and the testing will get you real validation, but
Prototyping.
until they press purchase, or they, whatever.
Well, let's talk about that, because
Okay.
like I said, product is all about risk, right? You have these 4 risks. So the first thing we do in product is we consider what are the four risks: value, usability, feasibility, viability, because not everything is equally risky. Everything has a different profile. And then once we decide, well, the real risk here is value, the real risk is feasibility, then the question becomes, well, how serious is this risk? Normally, when we talk about risk, we talk about consequence. If we screw it up, How big a deal is that? If that's a big deal, we're going to take it very seriously, and we're going to have a very high bar for confidence. That might even require statistical significance, in other words, proof, before we make a decision. Most of the time, though, it's not that severe. And we're like, we just need a level of evidence that gives us some confidence that this is going to be used. So we talk about consequence, we talk about level of evidence, and then we use the right prototyping technique and the right testing technique. Mm-hmm. And that includes whether it's qualitative or quantitative. But let me just say, I've been doing this as long as anybody. I have never found a situation where you actually have to build the product and ship it. We can always do on the order of magnitude less. Mm-hmm. So then ship it. So this is very important. That's fundamentally the difference between discovery and delivery. In waterfall, what was wrong? I mean, there's a lot of things that were horrible about the waterfall world, but the defining characteristic was what Ari was just saying. You really didn't know until you shipped, which means the way people in the process world talk about that is all the risk is at the end. You don't know anything really until you ship it. Discovery is the opposite of that. Discovery says, don't write a line of code until you've already addressed these risks. Already. So number one, you are tackling the risks up front, not the end. Another signature of waterfall is the old world where some product manager type would define requirements, usually by gathering them from stakeholders, and then document those somewhere. They used to be called PRDs or long user stories. And then they would hand those over to designers and say, give me a design that meets those requirements. And then they would take the whole mess to the engineers at sprint planning and say, build this. Mm-hmm. That's literally waterfall. Mm-hmm. Even though I just described agile, that's waterfall, not agile. On the other hand, in a good product team in discovery, it is the product manager, designer, and engineer that are iterating on every one of these iterations. Every one. So you don't have, you would never go without showing your engineer the prototype, because they're the ones that can tell you, can they build it? And number two, is there a better way to do this? So that's the second thing is this idea of iteration, solving problems collaboratively. And then the final point, that difference between waterfall and how good teams work, is in waterfall, it's all output. There's no way to sign up for anything other than output in that model. And in an empowered team, they're held accountable to outcomes. So they have to iterate. That's why we iterate so much, is to achieve an outcome. And we don't actually build until we believe we have evidence we can achieve an outcome. So that's why discovery and delivery is so fundamentally different than the old waterfall. It's also why you can see a lot of teams embraced agile, but they didn't really let go of waterfall.
Mm. Yeah, you're right. I think also there are many different ways how to experiment and how to test. So you can also test maybe without, or let's say with a bit more of engagement from the user side when we talk about prototyping, or that they need to maybe make a reservation or give a little bit of money that creates more evidence. And I see that here also in the chat, a lot of people coming up with other ideas about shipping to a small amount of users. I think there are many different ways, but I just guess that this also creates more evidence in the discovery phase before you ship it. And yeah, interesting to see that all.
Yeah, so I don't think you mentioned that a lot in your book, like the prototyping, like as a format. Do you? I don't remember that.
Prototyping is just, those are user prototypes. Nobody uses that term except for the guy that wrote that book. So nobody uses that. Okay. So yeah, there are four kinds of prototypes, okay. And that's just one of the types. It's great. But that is, early Google, before he even joined, used to refer to this as fake it before you make it. And that's what we're talking about. This is not a magical new thing.
Maybe I'm not using the right word. What I mean was the type of prototype where you actually don't do a high fidelity prototype where people give you feedback, but you actually like make people create an action, like add a button to like a new feature and see if people actually click on it or something. Like it's more
Well, that's
like
called
that.
that's another technique called a fake door test. There's so
Okay.
many good
Yeah.
techniques.
Okay.
You know, if you read the book Inspired, you know, there's like over 100 techniques talked about in there. There's so many for all of these things we're talking about. And those aren't even all the techniques that I know about. Those are just the ones I think that every good team should know about.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, it depends on whether we're testing demand. It depends on whether we're testing the solution. It depends on whether we're testing quantitatively or qualitatively. It depends on what the risk is. Yeah, there's a lot
Okay.
to product.
And if you're a product manager today and you're listening to Marty Cagan and you're like, oh my God, like I want to be working in a place like this. What tips do you have for them to like go in there, talk to their bosses, like have them, where do they start? Because it's really hard, you know, it's hard to like influence. A lot of times the great ideas and the inspiration comes from the lower end product managers, and they're really excited about doing like these kind of discovery things and being more empowered and thinking more in a problem solving kind of context and not a feature creation. Like, and they're like really excited, and then they go to their bosses and then they're like, well, my boss said he tried everything and like it's just another thing, or you know what I mean, like we don't want to, like this is, things aren't going to change here, you know, like this is the way it is. So aside from like telling them switch companies, is there anything else they can do? Like, is there anything?
I mean, I've been really happy to see how many people have told me they bought a copy of Empowered for their boss.
Yeah.
Because that's of course a great outcome. And honestly, a lot of those bosses have reached out saying, you know, I'm doing a call tomorrow with a CEO of one of the big scale ups right now in the UK. And it was that case exactly. One of his employees told him about this book. He read it reluctantly, he said, read it, and then it was like, oh my God, we should be doing this. And he's the one driving the transformation now. So yeah, I mean, I always recommend trying to get your current company to evolve. Now, getting your leaders to give you a chance is usually the easier part, because you can usually say, look, I realize we're not working the way Stripe is working, or we're not working the way Amazon's working. Why don't we try this? Most executives are willing to try it. But I will tell you the weak spot is usually not that. It's that the product manager needs to really step it up. In other words, if they've never been a product manager of a real product team, they've only been doing that project management we've been talking about, they have a big job to learn. And this takes some real work. And normally you'd have the benefit of a coach, so your boss coaching you, but these people usually don't. So that's where it takes some real work. The good news is I've seen many people who have done that. They've put in those efforts, they've attended talks, they've gone to training, they've done whatever so that they could show their boss what it could look like. And really the key there is the product manager. It's rare that the designer and engineers are the problem. It's usually the product manager. If the product manager is willing to step up and is willing to do the homework, which really boils down to three big things. Really learning about your customers. I remember the guy who coached me, I was an engineer and then an engineering manager before I learned product. And the guy who coached me on product, and I was doing products for other developers. So I thought I already knew the customers. And he told me that's never true. And so he wouldn't let me make a single decision until after I visited 30 customers. These were big enterprises, 30 enterprises, 15 in the US, 15 in Europe. And it totally changed my outlook. It totally changed everything, my course of my career. But he was right. I needed to get out there and learn about customers. I also didn't know anything about, I was just an engineer. So I knew about the technology side, but I didn't know go to market. I didn't know about the sales process. I didn't know about the financials. I didn't know about any of those dimensions of the business. And I had to learn. Now, it took me 3 months to learn these different skills, and I had a lot of gaps, but it was only 3 months. And I remember he told me, look, I'm not going to spend my time coaching you on this unless you're willing to put in the effort. But he said, if you're willing to put in the effort, I have no doubt you can learn this stuff. And I said, I'm absolutely willing to put in the effort. I want to learn this stuff. I knew there was more to products than just the engineering. So I wanted to learn it. And I'm glad I did. And frankly, there's no reason really, almost anybody can do this if they're willing to put in the effort. But I had to read books. I had to take some course stuff, especially in finance. I had to get tutoring from somebody in the finance organization. I had to learn. I went from nothing to learning about marketing and product marketing and the sales process. And, you have to learn that stuff. So that's the second big thing, learn your business. The first was learn your customers. And the third is you need to immerse in the data. You need to become the expert on the data about your product. And that's it takes about an hour a day, actually, spending time with the data. But if you do those three things, you can really blow away your CEO, show them. And in my experience, they love seeing this. If somebody shows they know this stuff, this is amazing.
How about coaching? How about coaching? You mentioned coaching. Do you think that's a useful thing for young product managers if they don't have one in the company? So seek for additional coaching?
Yeah, I think everybody should have a coach. I really do. Now, I was taught that this is the primary job of your manager. And so I was taught that. And I will tell you, my first job was at HP Labs. I worked there for 10 years. And every day of those 10 years, I had at least one manager coach responsible for coaching me. Sometimes I had two because I was trying to learn something that my manager didn't know. So I thought that was normal. Now I know it's not normal. But so a couple things. First of all, I wrote the foreword to Teresa's book. And in the foreword, I said, one of the reasons I'm excited about this book is if you haven't had coaching, this is like a good substitute. And then there's, for those of you in Germany, there's another book that came out called Strong by Petra Willy. Petra is a longtime product leader. I've known her for years. She was at one of the companies I advised, an obvious high potential person. And she not only wrote a book, but she also does coaching. And I have introduced her to, I don't know how many companies in Germany and the Nordic countries. So she's another good person. And, for those of you in other places around the world, there are people that do coaching in Brazil and of course in the US and Canada and India and China. There's people that coach on product all over now. There's not as many as there should be, because frankly, the main thing you want to do when you decide who should coach you is see if they really know how to do product from a good product company. If they don't, don't expect them to be able to help you become good.
I think we're, our time is up, and but I just have one thing, which is with the getting to know your customers, your first point, like really know your customers and talk to your customers. I feel that that's true for the engineers as well and for the designers as well. I feel like when I go into these and do discovery with these teams, like I feel like it's a shame that that the engineers aren't also talking to the customers, or at least seeing recordings of these, conversations, because to be fully to fully empathize with who you're designing for, or who you're creating or programming things for, or whatever. I feel like, what do you think about that? Is it just
sure? No, I've written a bunch about this. I feel very strongly about it. So let's separate. When we talk about a product manager coming up to speed on their product, that can be the product manager go off and do a bunch of customer interviews. That's fine. That's not product discovery. When you're doing product discovery, it is always the product manager, always the product designer, right there with you. And then we like to include one of the engineers on every visit. And that is, I tell people the magic happens when the engineer is there, for all the reasons you're getting at. But, and it's not enough to watch the recordings. That rarely causes the result. You really want them to be right there, able to ask questions and basically able to see the pain. So this is super exposed, super
Yes, to
important.
understand their complexities. It's really
Exactly.
wonderful. when you
Humble
do that.
upon the truth.
Anyway, okay, we're not going to take more of your time, even though we could for 5 hours if we wanted, if
Yes.
you had time. I really recommend everyone buying those 2 books. It's amazing. Those 2, Inspired and Empowered. And I'm actually looking forward to your partner's book, which seems really exciting too. And also you can go to Marty's website, which is Silicon Valley Product Group, SVPG. And there's all of his amazing writings and inspiring writings and in your blog, which I read all the time. And anything else that you want to add to this?
Well, I hope it was useful. And yeah, I appreciate everybody's time, and I wish everybody the best of luck.